right? And actually, it's still, as you move forward with more aggressive FPGAs, you can cover more of the area. So what we're doing is we're addressing a market which is inherently growing for the low and medium-sized applications, whereas the ASSP companies are getting more and more focused on the high-volume plays. So what do we provide? We actually provide standard parts. These standard parts can be customized by our customers to meet the specific needs of their applications. They can use them to get to market very, very quickly. So you can take an FPGA and change it several times because you've got a development system. You can program it on the spot, and you can address your requirements. These modifications are made very quickly. Now you can do several iterations and changes a day. If you compare that to a mask set on an advanced process node, it takes several months to go through a mask set change. So obviously there are some benefits from the fast changes, especially as markets are changing very quickly and the customer needs are very volatile, and hence it's very difficult to predict what is required. In addition, there's very low inventory risk for the customers because they buy the standard products from us. They can program them in the field, and there's basically no upfront non-recurring engineering cost. So for a certain number of applications, these are very compelling benefits that are driving our business going forward. And as we look at what's happening, and these are some data points that we've monitored on the left, in the past, it was very rare that we would actually see design wins where we would displace ASICs and ASSPs, and that is becoming more broader and broader and in more and more markets. In addition, this is all in a show me the money, right? Is the market growing or isn't it growing? And in 2010, for sure, the FPGA market grew 4x faster than the ASIC market and 2x faster than the ASSP market. I fundamentally believe that there will always be markets which are serviced best by ASSPs, and some of those markets will have a phenomenal growth rate, and we won't be able to compete. But more and more markets will be serviced by FPGAs unless they fall into that high volume realm. Now, we do have some local examples, and we're particularly looking for indigenous Indian companies, and obviously Tejas Networks has been a huge success story. They have delivered market leadership. They have a very strong affinity to FPGAs. They have programmable platform strategy. One of the benefits that we can provide our customers is to enable the customers to come up with a set of family members using the same core technology, but using FPGAs of different sizes. And they've built up a world-class FPGA design team. They have their IP repository, which is targeted FPGAs. And from their perspective, and by the way, they compete in a very, very challenging market. So they're not the largest player by any stretch. They actually compete very successfully through differentiated products against the giants of the industry. That just highlights some of the opportunities that can be achieved through using FPGAs. The third element that I talked about, which is driving the business, is the broadening of the middle class. And this is a phenomenon which is happening and now accelerating. It used to be 10 years ago that if the economy in North America or in the US would, sneeze, the entire world's economy would catch a cold. That is no longer the case. As the middle class is broadening a very fast basis in emerging economies, then that is actually growing the overall market, because the middle class, by definition, has requirements for new solutions, and it's also providing a larger safety net. So the downturn which we all experienced in 2008 and 2009 would have been so much worse had it not been this phenomenon of the broadening middle class in China, in India. And it's actually happening, everyone knows about India and China, but it's happening on a accelerated basis. Just one example, if you look at Brazil, 30 million people joined the middle class in the past 6 years. That's a huge number. And all of Latin America is actually now growing at a fast rate. That is driven primarily by the natural resources they have, but it's generating a new set of customers, and the middle class is expanding. Expectation is that this will continue to accelerate going forward, will broaden the markets overall. India in particular is well poised to lead this next wave of innovation, and to some extent one of the benefits India has is actually the fact that the infrastructure is still relatively poor, and as a result there is the benefit of being able to leapfrog and not having to go through all of the intermediate steps. Now, this doesn't happen overnight, but actually, if it's done right, it could move India to a leadership position on a much broader basis than it has today. And one example which is happening now and starting to roll out is the direct adoption of wireless broadband, and that's sort of bypassing the infrastructure of dial-up and the old traditional wireless. And so this limited legacy is enabling nimble adoption of leapfrog technologies. And this is really an opportunity, and it's an opportunity that I fundamentally believe it would be a tremendous shame if India doesn't seize this and move forward and demonstrate its leadership. So you can see on the left a whole host of very positive attributes. The growth in the middle class, the 32 to 147 million seems incredibly understated based on other studies I've read, so I would check that number. Expectation is it will be the third largest economy in the world by 2030. 2030 is not that far away, so today we have USA first, China is the second, Japan is the close third, but within 20 years or less, India should be the third. The fact that it's a young company where the average age is very young is a huge benefit. The tremendous number of well-educated engineering graduates is a tremendous benefit, and so on and so on. So, if you look at the basic ingredients, they're actually all there, and it's all within the hands of the Indian population. Of course, there needs to be the right support, and there needs to be the right government intervention to enable this, or government encouragement to enable incentives to enable this to happen. Now, one thing that I believe will facilitate an acceleration of this trend is a faster adoption of differentiated system design. And if you look at the way products were defined in the past, and if you go back 20 years or 25 years, I actually worked at the beginning of my career at Digital Equipment. It was a relatively vertically integrated company. We had our own fab, we had our own EDA tools, we had our own IP, we did all of the ASICs in-house, and it went on and on. And Digital was a small example of that. There were much larger examples. IBM, the Japanese companies were large examples of that. Now, what sort of has happened over the years is there's been a disaggregation of these capabilities. If you move into the second wave of outsourcing, then there was more of a transition to a fabless model. This was driven by the fact that owning your own fab was very complex and very expensive, and very few companies, vertical companies, as big as they were, wanted to invest billions of dollars of capital in owning their own fabs. And so that started to happen. The fabless companies emerged, EDA companies emerged, and IP companies emerged, and things started to move forward. Now, over the years, moved to the third generation. We're just at the cusp of the fourth generation, where basically believe there's an emergence of a new set of applications where the basic functionality will be provided from independent sources, like the FPGA companies such as Xilinx. But then the differentiation will be done by the end customer. And this approach that we're driving very aggressively has at its core a concept we call targeted design platforms. And our expectation is that we'll provide the core technology, some of the horizontal capabilities on top of it, some level of vertical capabilities, some support of sophisticated protocols, for example, if it's a communications application. But then more and more, the differentiation at the hardware level will be done by the end customer, where they will use their system level skills to drive that. And that's what is happening. Now, if you look at this transition, it's actually a very profound change. Going back 20, 25, 30 years ago, you had tall engineers. These are engineers who understood the system, understood the architecture, understood the silicon implementation, and they did the entire soup to nuts implementation, usually in extremely small groups. What has happened since then is the technology has become so complex and the development takes so much time that you now have to work in very large teams in order to do that. You have examples, these are well documented. At the one extreme, you have Intel, which to design their high-end microprocessors, they have teams of several hundred, arguably over 1,000 engineers per program.